Journalist and political commentator Fareed Zakaria argues that modern liberalism is failing because it has abandoned its original mandate, the fight against concentrated power. He points to a distinct set of societal symptoms. Markets are choked by unchecked monopolies, merit replaced by inherited advantage. Elite institutions operate to protect themselves, while the broader public sinks into a state of structural passivity. Conventional political science typically diagnoses this decay as a subjective crisis, a collective failure of moral character, a loss of political will, or exhaustion of an ideology. The Bridge 360 Metatheory model offers a completely different diagnostic lens. Bridge 360 treats these failures as objective, thermodynamic pathologies that emerge whenever a complex system approaches its limits of navigability. Stripping away political labels, we can map a societal network exactly like a thermodynamic heat map, tracking the flow of energy, resources, and fragility. This relies on a foundational rule of the Bridge 360 architecture. Physical, informational, and social systems do not operate by different rules. They all occupy a single, unified entropy geometry. Saving a political system requires abandoning moral posturing. Governance is a strict physics problem of managing systemic disorder. To measure the health of any governance structure, we use a metric called the normalized entropy eigenvector, or the epsilon spine. This scale defines the absolute limits of system stability, running from 0 to 1. 0 represents perfect, rigid order, which maximizes fragility. 1 represents total, unconstrained disorder, or pure chaos. The glowing midrange represents the epsilon spine. Viable governance, regardless of its specific political or economic ideology, is strictly defined by its ability to keep the system's entropy confined within this navigable stability corridor. The ultimate threat to any complex system occurs when it crosses a critical fragility threshold. When the boundaries fracture, the system enters an ungovernable state known as the blowout zone. Political survival depends entirely on maintaining this central corridor. Applying this mathematical baseline reveals exactly how modern liberalism is currently fracturing its own foundation. Zakaria notes that the American system of meritocracy has calcified, hardening into a new aristocracy defined by inherited advantage. In the language of Bridge 360, this phenomenon is identified as the volatility paradox. This network diagram illustrates the mechanics of the paradox. Elite institutions and actors optimize locally to secure their own positions. As their advantages compound over time, they lock down their networks, achieving total structural closure to protect themselves from outside variables. This extreme local optimization carries a hidden thermodynamic cost. By making their own immediate environment perfectly rigid and secure, these elite nodes generate a massive amount of systemic chaos, or entropy. The system resolves this pressure through entropy dumping. The privileged structures preserve their own safety by pushing the costs, disorder, and fragility downward, forcing weaker agents to absorb the burden. Institutional self-protection is a parasitic, entropy-exporting architecture that actively destabilizes the surrounding environment to maintain its own stability. This maps directly onto Zakaria's observations regarding the breakdown of social mobility, the rise in widespread addiction, and the destruction of societal ladders of opportunity. The everyday citizens at the bottom of the structure are the weaker agents tasked with absorbing the massive entropy burdens exported by closed elite systems. Every individual requires a viability corridor, a minimum baseline of structural support, encompassing health, education, and economic mobility, to function as a stable agent within the system. Here, we see the mechanical result of unbounded entropy extraction. The citizens are bombarded by exported disorder until their connections fail, and they are pushed completely outside their own viability corridors. Societal decay is a state of systemic leakage. The governing liberal institutions observe the disorder, but they structurally fail to bound or repair it. In a system dominated by entropy dumping, the concept of freedom is hollowed out. It is reduced to nothing more than the right to decay inside an ungovernable space. Zakaria warns that legacy political parties are losing ground to right-wing populists and socialists for a simple reason. The extremes sound like they are willing to fight. The meta-theoretical diagnosis for this rapid shift in political allegiance is found in rule of inference memetics. When institutions fail to repair systemic entropy, the standard rules of logical inference degrade. In the absence of a stable corridor, human reasoning is captured by tribal identity and raw emotion. This visualization maps the resulting behavior. Stripped of their structural support, the broken agents inevitably gravitate toward massive, aggressive, new mimetic attractors. These populist attractors draw power by promising to destroy entrenched elite privilege. However, they operate completely outside the epsilon spine, meaning they lack the mathematical capacity to actually govern the system. Extreme political tribalism is not a symptom of mass irrationality. It is the predictable mathematical consequence of intelligent agents seeking new anchors when their institutional corridors collapse. Zachariah prescribes a specific cure. Liberalism can only survive if it recovers its radical spirit and actively attacks monopoly and entrenched advantage. Translated into physical repair logic, the mandate is clear. The governance system must forcibly reopen blocked corridors and immediately halt the extraction of weaker nodes. The Bridge 360 framework identifies the exact mechanism required to execute this systemic repair: entropy-driven altruism. This requires reversing the volatility paradox. The hardened top-tier nodes are forced to reabsorb their previously exported entropy. This reallocation reduces pressure on the lower tiers, allowing citizen nodes to reconnect safely inside the epsilon spine. Charles Darwin established that individual competition for limited resources drives natural selection, a concept that built the foundation of capitalist economics. But biologist Peter Kropotkin observed a complementary truth in his theory of mutual aid. In nature, cooperation and altruism emerge as the necessary evolutionary response when a system faces critical environmental stress. Individual competition is highly effective at building complex systems. But altruistic entropy sharing is the mandatory feedback loop required to prevent a mature, hyper-complex system from tearing itself apart. This reframes classic socialist principles and Zachariah's call for civic responsibility as the operational form of entropy management. This aligns closely with philosopher John Rawls's concept of justice as fairness. Proper institutional design must guarantee that the systemic entropy burden is distributed so that it does not permanently crush any single agent. Altruism serves as the primary multi-agent stability principle within the Bridge 360 framework, acting as the mechanism that holds the system's internal disorder within the epsilon spine. By tracking the normalized entropy eigenvector, we can see that entropy sharing is the only configuration capable of stabilizing a network once it reaches peak complexity. Survival in the 21st century depends on shifting from symbolic politics to the technical discipline of maintaining entropy-bounded navigability.